All right, we'll kick it off. Perfect. So I've given this snow camp, it's been a little while since I've done it, but we give this snow camp out as a nice overview of Snowflake and how AI and ML works in Snowflake as an organization. And to start off with, what we always tell organizations is, at the end of the day, there is no AI strategy without a data strategy. And when I first started at Snowflake, we were data warehousing, data lake. We were just getting into applications. We had data science. And Snowflake as an organization when we started really was a cloud data warehouse, but we've grown so much from that. And we really are in such a great position for organizations, because when you make the great choice to work with Snowflake, you have built out that data foundation and that data strategy already, many situations, because you now have the ability to have the fantastic AI strategy on top of that. And we've had iterations and additions to our Snowflake platform over the years. Last year was probably the most amount of new features, capabilities, and focus on AI that I've seen since I've started over the other years combined. And you may have seen this type of slide before if you've seen Snowflake stuff before, and it's been variations of it. It used to be the small little rainbow slide. But the idea here is just to give you an idea of what Snowflake looks like at a kind of a 30,000 foot view from kind of the middle out, really just to give you that foundational knowledge of what's going on. And I mean, at the end of the day, Snowflake is all about allowing you to work with any type of data that works for you. So interoperable storage, whether that be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured, like PDFs, documents, audio files, images, anything that you want to move into Snowflake, and it's interoperable. So we support Iceberg, open table format. So if you want to keep your data where it is and use Snowflake as a query engine, absolutely you can. And we've grown in the sense that when you have compute needs and you want to use different workloads, you can pick and choose what works for you, whether that be from regular CPU level compute with our warehouses that scale from an extra small warehouse up to a 6XL warehouse just in that t-shirt sizing. You don't have to worry about the EC2 instance or the VM settings or all of that behind the scenes. You just pick the compute and you go. More recently, we've come out and partnered with NVIDIA and other capabilities to bring you GPU level compute for higher level model training and inference that you'll start to see with AI, and containerized compute as well. And so you can bring in any application, any language. Our core languages that we support is SQL, Python, Java, and Scala. But with our containerization, you can really bring in any application in any language. I've seen people build that full Doom video game from the early 90s and run this on Snowflake. Not the most cost-efficient way to run a video game, but you can build anything you want on Snowflake in that sense and have that run on Snowflake's infrastructure as well. So the newest ring, the Cortex AI ring that we have here, that we've introduced, this is what we'll be focusing on today, is really the idea of bringing that democratization of using AI to the end user, whether that be building out a chatbot through our Cortex Analyst or Cortex Search capabilities through our AI Studio, allowing you to pick and choose the different LLMs that's interesting to you to see how they compare with each other. All of that is done through a UI, so you can just pick what you need and run it. You can see the output that works for you. You'll start to see all of the capabilities of our chat, through our chat API, so that you can interact with these LLMs with our Cortex capabilities through any endpoint that works for you. You want to put it in Slack, in Teams. You want to put it into let's say a front-end application that you're running. Fill your boots. And that allows you to pick and choose the models that you want from a model garden that I'll showcase in a moment. That allows you to kind of work to what works best for your specific workloads. Now, as you expand out in that cloud services circle, this is really the Snowflake managed services capabilities that we bring to you as a managed service provider. From our overall Horizon security capabilities and catalog capabilities to make sure that everything that you have is fully secure, compliant, optimized, and do all of that work for you. And then that final circle kind of around the outside edge, we call out our snow grid, like our cross-region, cross-cloud capabilities. That's what allows you to interact and share and get access to data from other Snowflake accounts and Snowflake environments across the world and allow you to have that same experience regardless of your cloud provider, whether you're on AWS, Azure, or GCP, and have that interoperability between those different organizations as well. So as mentioned, you have that solid data foundation already, that storage that you have, the full governance to be able to allow the end user to only see what they're allowed to see, to only query what they're allowed to query, to only gain access to that through our role-based access control. And then all of Snowflake's messaging from the start still rings true today. We're all about bringing the logic and the code to the data versus bringing your data and logic out to the code. So a lot of organizations, once you bring your data into one location, storing it, managing it, securing it, all of those headaches, if you do it to another location and another location, you have to worry about that every single time. So you want to be able to bring your AI and your applications to that data itself. And as I go through this, feel free to stop me at any time for questions or put up your hand in the chat, and Michelle and Rita and Stanley can answer them as we go through. But yeah, feel free to ask them as we go through as well. So normally the SnowCamp goes through both AI and ML. And if you kind of look at the overall view of what we look at from AI and ML, we have two flavors. We have our Snowflake machine learning or Snowflake ML, which we won't be going through today in depth because I know we wanted to focus on Cortex. And then we'll talk about the Cortex generative AI side. Now, everything else I kind of started talking about, the Snowflake Horizon, model governance, model registry at our foundation, our container runtime and GPU level AI infrastructure compute. And then on the top part, app development, where you can interact with that Studio UI or work with Streamlit, which we'll showcase today. All of that is to activate the data and work with that. And that's kind of what I showcased on the architecture slide before. And overall, again, it's easy to work with, making it usable through a UI or through an API. It's efficient. It's a much lower cost than alternatives that you can have when managing multiple systems. And we're always, we're trusted. Everything in Snowflake is fully audited. It's managed. It's fully trusted for organizations across Snowflake. So I'll just talk to Snowflake ML for a brief second. I mean, this is the view of what we look at for Snowflake ML. If you want to dig into this on another session, we absolutely can. But this is where we're building the end-to-end ML pipeline for organizations to work from being able to really build out, we have out-of-the-box functions for things like forecasting or an anomaly detection or contribution explorer, that you can just run simple ML functions and it'll build out all of the, let's say, script for you just in a few lines of code, where other capabilities like doing forecasting or anomaly detection could take hundreds to thousands of lines of code to do some of this. And similarly, on the kind of custom ML with Snowpark ML pipelines, that end-to-end capability from modeling and doing your feature engineering, using data frame access, building and storing those features as a first-class object that can be then reused and usable for any part of the organization in our model registry. All of that gives you that ability to kind of run that end-to-end ML ops in Snowflake. But today's focus is going to be more on Cortex AI and what we look at in the view of that. And if you think about what's possible with AI today, you'll have a lot of organizations, they're typically starting with your structured data, right? Your rows and columns of data, maybe your semi-structured JSON, XML type formats, and you're going to be running some queries and analysis on that. And then the more familiar probably AI that we've all been are exposed to in the past year and a half now is like the LLMs, the ChatGPTs, where you're asking a question in unstructured format and getting that response back. And in this case, you might have done this in the past. Think of things like sentiment analysis or translation of data. Like we have that, we can go to Google and translate a set of text and it'll give us the output. Like there are abilities that have been out there for a while today, but being able to apply that to your unstructured data at scale and at runtime, that's where the Gen AI stuff starts to come in a lot. And text to SQL has been around for a long time as well in different BI tools and capabilities, but being able to very quickly like ask a question of your data and get that response and maybe an output of that SQL query or a chart or a visualization, having an objective answer of your data, like that is something that people are doing a lot more today. And again, machine learning as well. We won't go deeper into machine learning today. But more recently, what we're finding is like having that unstructured PDF, unstructured document, and I want to ask a question like, what's the renewal process for 2024 in this specific region of this document? And instead of having to sift through a PDF and read through it, you can actually take that document and then take the text and embed it into a, let's say, almost like a vectorized database for really context relevant search against it, and then apply a large language model on top of that. So when I ask that question that I just said, it's going to give me my answer back and relevant to that question, maybe point me out to that document. And you probably, if you've looked into AI and Gen AI over the past year, you'll hear things like retrieval augmented generation chatbots or RAG chatbots, where it's subjective to your question and based on the documents that you're allowing it to look at. Now, the challenge that we typically see is this is hard to put into production, right? There's a lot of issues. Like all of last year and part of 2023, a lot of my conversations were with executives who were interested in AI. There was a lot of POCs, a lot of kicking the tires, a lot of little MVPs. But getting that into production is the challenge. And this is 2025 is the year of production, is where a lot of these companies have now started to get into like they figured out some of the lower hanging fruit of what works well with them, and they're now starting to move those in production. Now, if you're just starting out in AI, you're not behind. The good thing is a lot of the stuff last year that was like paving the way in initial conversations, and like you'll see some of the services that we've come out around search, around analysts, were all manual processes last year, and then we bundled it up and made it as a service to make it a lot easier. So it's a lot easier to get into production. But these were just some of the challenges that we noticed last year. It was hard to get accurate answers when you're asking questions of your data. There was a lot of egress and ungoverned copies of data by moving things around a lot. You still were dealing with silos of data if you're moving them to different systems and different capabilities. And this is not, I'm not saying with Snowflake necessarily, but when you're dealing with AI capabilities and Gen AI capabilities with other tools and platforms that you get. Hallucinations are always a challenge when you're dealing with Gen AI and LLMs. And a hallucination is your ChatGPT or your LLM is going to give you an answer no matter what. Like it'll give you an answer, right? And that could be wrong. I mean, you'll see cases of lawyers who've used GPT or style LLMs to get case notes in cases that just hallucinates cases that weren't actually real. And you'll see multiple tool sets and multiple pieces together can be expensive and hard to manage.
Carson, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt you there. You were talking about two very interesting things there.
Sure.
The retrieval augmented generation and the accuracy. First question, how you guys manage for the RAG to keep alive? What I'm meaning is the RAG files, once you save it, it's not longer a live file. So when the LLM is reading it, unless it reads the RAG file every single time, how you guys are managing that?
That's a great question. Absolutely. So that I'll talk to in our Cortex search piece, but the short answer is our Cortex search services automatically updates and indexes the files as long as they're available and updated, so you can have the most up-to-date information.
So it's running on a live server then?
It's running using Snowflake's our infrastructure, and think of like dynamic tables and updating. So there is a background service. And so you can create a search service pointing to a set of data or set of documents. And this goes both for analyst and search. And then it will automatically update. Now, if you don't want that running all the time, let's say like I have people who will they have like, a million rows of data that they need to do a search against, or let's say analyst search service against, but it's not updating, it's updating once a quarter. You can have that search service turn off, right? So it's indexing, it's embedding, it's doing that, and then you turn off the service, so you're saving yourself some money in that sense. But the short answer is it's automatically doing that for you, and I'll talk to that when I talk about Cortex search.
Thank you. I will wait.
Perfect. So this is where Snowflake comes in as some of the capabilities that you'll start to see, and how we look at that is we have, and it's cool being in a company for many years because you start to see the acquisitions that we make from companies that we buy coming into features and functions that we have. We bought a company called Applica a few years back that turned into Document AI. We bought a company called Neva, and it's coming into some of our search capabilities, and actually our CEO is who created Neva. So there's some cool stuff that's come in, but the idea being we have these capabilities that are coming out, which I'll talk to in a moment, that allow you to do some of those capabilities against the text to SQL through Cortex Analyst, or text to retrieval augmented generation through Cortex Search, our foundational models that do things like translation and sentiment analysis. All of those are available to you. We have a lot of customers. These are just a couple that have jumped in feet first, from JP Morgan Chase around using automated BI with natural kind of those foundational models. Zoom using customer success chatbots. Now there's many more customers in this than just doing some of these examples, and so we have a lot of examples and quick starts and information to really start testing and playing this out with your own data today. You've heard me say this a couple times, and again, it rings true. Like Snowflake for AI, it's easy, it's efficient, and it's trusted. Just like full stop. Like when you're working with our AI, that's our guiding principles. Okay, so I'll start to get into the demo now and how this works, and I'll do this back and forth. I'll kind of do a little slide, talk about it, and jump in to show a little snippet of the demo, how it works as well. When I'm looking at Cortex AI at the high level, this is what we look at. So if you zoomed in on that Cortex AI box from before, these are the capabilities that make up that Cortex AI box. Now, at the bottom, if you think about our foundational models capability, this is where we have partnered, as you see here, with a variety of partners. There's more than this as well. For example, most recently, we just actually partnered with Anthropic for Claude, but like 8121 Labs, NVIDIA, Meta, Mistral, Reka, they all have their open source LLMs that we have taken, and we host in our own GPU level inference cluster for you to allow access and run it just as a SQL query. So if you think about those, and a lot of that foundational capabilities is what makes up a lot of the higher level functionalities that we have in Snowflake in our Cortex capabilities. So that starting at one, the task specific and embed models, like think of those as like using Snowflake like translate, sentiment analysis. I'll show you what those mean in a moment. And then we build out our foundational models as well that you can pick and choose from your model garden. And if you want to take, let's say, a specific model that may be more expensive, that's more accurate, and you have your result set, and you might use a cheaper model that's less accurate, but like much more cheaper, you can actually do fine-tuning on these models, and I'll show you how to do that, to make your fine-tuned, cheaper model, in some cases, more accurate, more responsive than some of the more expensive models at a lower cost. All of this is available to you on a very easy-to-use UI to build out these services, and then we'll walk through a little bit of information on how to do that in our Cortex Studio, and where we actually showcase like our Cortex Analyst capabilities, which is natural language conversations with your structured data. And then also similarly, as your question around retrieval augmented generation, natural language conversations with your unstructured documents, like your PDFs and your invoices and so forth. Now, I always like to ask this question, what is harder to do? Search on unstructured documents or natural language search on structured documents? Does anyone have an idea or thought behind that? I'll give the answer. The harder thing is typically to do that natural language search on the structured documents, on like naturally on your tables and queries, and we'll get into why that is in a moment. Okay, so to set up the demo that we're going to walk through, I think of this as a high-level telco organization. They have a whole bunch of variety types of data. In this particular use case, they have support cases, support tickets that they need to manage. Okay. And so the walkthrough of those features that we're going to look at today, if you think about it, you have your customer support team, you have emails coming in, you have text messages and phone messages coming in to support tickets through a support ticket management portal, for example. And in this case, you're going to be an AI engineer who wants to, be tasked to get more information out of it and figure out why are we getting so many tickets, what's wrong with certain tickets, and help increase customer support. And what we'll do is we'll walk through those task-specific models, do things like translate it into a different language, and then even work with some of the foundational models from those providers that we have to really categorize your tickets into certain categorizations so that they can be utilized for training and evaluation, and then fine-tune some of those smaller models to be more efficient than some of the more expensive models. From there, we'll also have invoices, PDFs, unstructured documents. And what we can do is we can look at the Cortex analyst case, which is really still on the structured data. And we'll look at the semantic layer that helps you build much more accurate responses of that natural language conversation. So your analyst can just use an API or chat with it through Streamlit. And then similarly, we'll look at the unstructured cases as well. So those documents, those invoices, we'll chat through it as well and through Streamlit as well and show how that works in Snowflake and those search services. Any questions so far? Any comments? Does this sound like it'll be a good use? Yes? Perfect. Okay. So we'll start off with the task-specific models. Again, they're very cost-effective LLMs. So the foundational, I talked about the number one, task-specific and embed models. They're very lightweight, predefined models, very, very inexpensive models that can be used for those specific tasks. So here's a few of them that are listed, from summarization to sentiment analysis, where you can extract an answer, or things like translate. Those are designed to be very easily used, just like a SQL query. Call it out, and it'll give you that response right out of the gate. So what I'll do in this case is I'm going to take those support tickets, so support cases, and I'm going to run some tasks models in this case here. So I'll jump over to my Snowflake, and we're still active. Good. All right. Have you played in our notebooks environment before? Anybody? Show of hands, or no? Okay. So maybe I'll give you an idea what this looks like here. So in our Snowflake UI, this is mine. You'll see here on the left, you can get your home button here. You have this list, and this is really your home base for everything. Now, under projects, you're going to see the ability to go to worksheets, which is where you can go to your SQL or Python worksheets where you can actually run your worksheets. You'll see Streamlit, which we'll go to Streamlit in a moment, and then notebooks as well. So the Snowflake notebooks environment, this is where you can create a new notebook from scratch. You can import a Jupyter notebook that you may have already been working on. And our notebook environments are great. You can import different packages through our Anaconda package manager, or you can actually import third-party packages through, let's say, a stage, and that allows you to work with packages that you might be utilizing today or not, and you need to bring in something else. And we have package management and security around that as well. And I'm in my notebook environment here to start off with, just to showcase some of the data in Snowflake, and I'll run through this notebook environment. Now, the first thing I wanted to do here is I'm just doing some import sessions, running this so I can visualize it. Our notebook supports SQL, Python, Markdown, visualizations from our Streamlit capability as well. So you can use visualizations directly in the cells itself. And all I'm doing here is just using a session.table. I'm just looking at a support tickets field in my Snowflake database, in one of my tables. And what we're looking at today, ticket ID, customer name, customer email, the type of service that they have, the actual unstructured request that the support ticket came through, and how they sent that information. That's all I'm looking at here. And so to start off with on those task-specific models, what I did here, you can do this automatically to look at every single field, but I just straight up took one of those support tickets and just dropped it in, is you can run it just as if you're running like a Snowflake, like a SQL function. It's select snowflake.cortex is the precursor, and then one of the task-specific models that I talked about is translate. So I could say translate, and it will automatically actually pick up the language that you're looking at, and then translate it into something that you want in this case. So I'm translating it from English to French. Okay. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy to use, and you can run this in any pipeline that you're running using a SQL. And if you want to do a summary or the sentiment analysis, for example, pull out the sentiment analysis from -1 to 1, -1 being bad sentiment, 1 being positive, you can run that at any time. So what I'll do next is kind of working with our foundational models next, is really having that easy access to some of the ones that we have provided with you. Now, we have a whole host of models that we host in our inference cluster for you. And this is actually an older slide. There is probably almost twice as many now. From Llama, Reka, like I mentioned, we just partnered with Anthropic Claude, which is probably the top one now above GPT by far. Mistral Large, Reka Flash, and you can see here the overall accuracy and availability. And what I find with these LLMs is they're all really good. Like they're all great, but they'll have different outputs. It's an interesting world now to live in where you're like fighting with a computer, like, no, that's wrong, change the output and try this again, versus like it used to be very deterministic. But now when you're working with these, like you see, there's task-specific ones that are more expensive and much more accurate, use a lot more parameters, what they've been trained on, versus some of the smaller parameters. Like for example, Llama 3 is 405 billion parameters that it was trained on, where Mistral is 7 billion. But you can pick and choose. Think of it as a model garden. And so some tasks are good for the small LLMs, but some when you're doing like code analysis or like deep level summarization or outputs, like you might want to use a larger one as well. And so what I'll do today is I'll go through some of that. I'll show you an example, like the larger foundational model, Llama 3.1, 405 billion versus the 7B. What do those outputs look like? How do they differ? And then from that, what do we do from there? Any questions so far? So far, so good? Oh, no. Restart the session. Okay. So what I can start with, and you'll start to see this as you're working with LLMs if you haven't already, is things like prompt engineering. The stuff you put in ChatGPT or the LLM when you say, you are an expert legal response person, or you are an agent in this case that helps organizations request that come from our support team. In my case, I want to summarize these requests. So you're telling the prompt, I'm just building a prompt right now. The request category is the reason why customers reached out. These are the possible request categories, and we're going to pick 5. Roaming fees, slow data speed, lost phone, add new line, and closing account. Now try doing it for this request and return only request category only. Now that line's important because it tries to avoid hallucinations in that case. A lot of times you can say, only give me this answer, otherwise say, I don't know. Like those are ways you start to use an LLM to say, don't hallucinate. So I've already run this ahead of time, just in the essence of time, a lot of these. But the idea being is I can use my large LLM response here. And in my case, when you call a Cortex function, we have like our GPT style Cortex function is cortex.complete. So in our notebook here, snowflake.cortex.complete, that's the function that you call, and then you just pick the LLM that you want to run. So that list of LLMs that you saw before, you can pick that. And in my case here, what I'm doing is I'm concatenating the prompt that I had from up here with the request, the unstructured text. I'm going to drop that into the Llama 3 Cortex complete request. And in this case here, so it's categorizing that request that they have, and it's giving me my large LLM response. See, as you see here, it's categorizing it in what I had. And it did a really good job. In fact, it's a great job. It gives exactly what I want. Perfect. So now if I want to try an example of the smaller LLM, the Mistral 7B, for example, I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did before, but in my case, I'm just changing it as Mistral 7B here, and I'm putting that response in. And then just to compare them, I've joined the previous response, this one up here, with my new response, so you can get an idea what it looks like. And as you can see, the large LLM gets it right. Mistral 7B, which is smaller, it gets it right, but it's not as good, and it's adding things like the request category for this customer is roaming fees. Based on this customer request, I think it's slow data speed. So it's not exactly what I asked for, but it's fairly right. Now the 7B is a more cost-effective LLM to run. So how can I use Snowflake to fine-tune this? Okay, So I can go back to my kind of Snowflake UI, and under the AI ML tab, you'll go into Studio. And this is that AI Studio that we have to really start to build out and work through the AI. And actually, before I jump into that, I just want to highlight this. So we have the no-code fine-tuning that we have. So the fine-tuning foundational models that we're going to run, this is where I'm going to use that AI Studio. Now, we didn't have this before. It was a preview feature, so I just like to show the slide of it. But it's available now for everyone to start testing with and playing with it in the AI Studio. And these will start to add on. As you can see here, there's 7 boxes. There used to be only 3. And this is both for the ML capabilities and for the LLM capabilities. You'll see here, for example, the ML capabilities, which we aren't talking about today, for building out forecasting detection, anomaly detection, classification. You can do that through the UI as well. But for LLM capabilities, you can start using our playground, for example, where you can compare different LLM responses. What we're going to be doing is creating a custom LLM or fine-tuning that LLM in this case. So it's really just a walkthrough to then create a couple scripts behind the scene to then output your fine-tuned LLM. And in my case here, I'm going to pick the data that I'm interested in. I'm just going to call this demo LLM, for example, and I'm going to run through the capabilities. So as I go through the prompt is asking me, like, what's the training data that you're going to use? So surprise, surprise, there's some training data that I have available that I can use. And it's that information that we looked at before, the prompt, the LLM responses, and so forth. Similarly, what is that prompt column that I want to utilize? Here I have a column named prompt. You are an agent that helps request the prompt that I looked at before. And then similarly, the completion, like what is the output, the good output that I want to have? And that's that large LLM response that I want to train it on. And then what do I want to validate it against? So I can validate it against the evaluation data here. And it has all my selections, it has everything, and I can actually go start training. And so then it'll go off into a serverless world and it'll train that LLM for you. And what it will do is it will come back, and in essence of time, I've already done that. It will effectively write this script here that will create it. It will take some of your data sets. It'll do a random forest split, 80-20 split. It'll create a trained LLM that I can then utilize moving forward as a more expensive, fine-tuned LLM that I need to use. So what did I do? I took that Cortex Complete and I made my own fine-tuned LLM called Support Tickets Fine-Tuned Mistral L7B, and I can run that through the prompt. And now I have my own accurate LLM that's as accurate, if not more accurate, than the Mistral, or sorry, the Llama 405 billion parameter model at a much cheaper rate. And so from there, I can use that and get an idea of, for example, the categorizations, and I can visualize it directly in our notebooks to see that roaming fees is the biggest category of issues that people call into or text into our organization, and maybe we should do something about that. So far, so good? Awesome. So that's really what we did there. So we took that training and evaluation set and we did some fine-tuning on that itself. So now we get into the cool stuff of the accurate text to SQL, interacting with analysts, with search, with what we call our Copilot as well. So I'll start off with, before I get into Cortex Analyst, I want to just highlight our Snowflake Copilot. Now, everybody seems to have a Copilot today. Now, we have one as well. Now, Copilot is really designed for your users that are in the Snowflake Snowsite UI and creating scripts and building queries directly in Snowflake, not necessarily the business users who are just asking the natural language questions of their data and want that answer back. The Copilot in Snowflake, for example, you may have seen it down here in the bottom right corner. It just floats down there in the bottom right corner. This is really designed for your kind of Snowflake developer, human in the loop, to ask a question. So to help me quickly build a SQL query. So Copilot is designed that I will take it and I'll point it to the database, the schema that I'm interested in, and I'm going to ask a question, let's say the number of tickets. I've done this before here, And under, let me try. I think it's because it stopped. Okay, well, whatever. All right, see, not perfect, but I've done it before. And just above here, the output is it's going to give me a query. Okay. Now I can add this. I can paste this in. I can run this query, for example, directly in it. And it's going to give me that query. Now, that Copilot is expecting a human in the loop. It's just looking at your schemas, your tables, your field names as is. Like it knows it's looking at that schema, the data schema that I was looking at, and there's ticket information, and it can pull back its best guesstimate of what the query should be. Now it will always run. We'll give you an answer that will run. But if your fields are cryptic or not machine readable, it's not necessarily going to know the answer to that question. And so it will give you, generally an accurate answer, but the way to get it to extremely accurate answer is where you'll start to move into Cortex Analyst. And so what I mean by that is Cortex Analyst allows you to have that natural language question of your data, but the layer below, well, okay, cool. my video went all crazy with some cool backgrounds. Yeah, the layer below the actual query is actually using a semantic layer, a semantic model that we can help you build out automatically, which gives you more detailed information of the metadata, the schemas, the table, the fields that you're running. So like what does revenue mean to you in your fields? Or what does cost of goods sold mean? And you can build out that semantic layer to give you a very deeper understanding of what that means. So then when you have that natural language question, as you see kind of running here, and I ask the question like, what's the number of tickets that I have? It's going to give me that SQL query with much more accurate responses. And it can be done through an API as well. So that semantic model, when we have some automatic generation toolkits to make this, we'll pull out, like, for example, revenue. The tables, name is daily revenue. There's a description you can put in it for just reading it. But then more importantly, under measures, like you can have synonyms. So if someone's asking about sales or income, it should be referencing that revenue table and that revenue field expression, and you can define what that means. So that this is an iterative process. So as you're there's a feedback loop. So as you build out your analyst applications, is you can have this more and more accurate as you go on. And so we say like start small, start on a small workspace or a workload, and then build that out. And like I mentioned before, you can just point it to your data. It will give you answers, and it'll give you a response, and it may or may not be exactly right. But then to make it even more accurate and more competent, I heard a good analysis at our kickoff last week was when, if you have children and you walk across the street, when they're really young, you hold their hand and you make sure they don't run in the street. Then you give them a little bit of leeway, and maybe you don't hold their hand, but you're right next to them as they grow up. And then, as they get older, they're running across the street with you anyways, but you're still watching them, right? It's that level of training as you go through this, just to build it out in the trust level as you iterate through your application. So to give you an idea of what this will look like, what I'll do is I'm going to use Streamlit as a front end, as an API access. Now you can use any front end as you want. We have examples already using Slack, for example, as an API query engine, or using Teams. We have a variety of ways that you can interact with the Analyst API. But in my case here, I'm going to use Streamlit to ask some questions of my structured data, and it's going to read against that semantic layer and give me my response back in a more accurate response. Questions on that? So far, so good? Cool. So what I can do is I can go back to my Snowflake UI, and I can click on Projects. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Streamlit. So I'm actually going to open up the Cortex Analyst application here. And so for an end user, and for internal use, like this is typically more than enough, you can use Streamlit, go nuts. You can share it across to your application, your team. You can share it to a specific role that someone in Snowflake might have. So all business users have access to this application, and it will define the security that business user role has. So they can only ask questions and get responses. Let's say when they ask about revenues for a specific region, it might just be their region. But the idea being is Streamlit, if you haven't seen Streamlit before, Streamlit is an open source organization that Snowflake acquired. So we acquired them 2+ years ago, and there is still a open source community that's available. If you haven't played with Streamlit before, it's a very, very easy to use, low code Python package visualization like dashboard front end that you can write applications that are out in the market space. And there's a ton of cool applications that are continuously being built. You can get the code and the script there, so you're not building anything from scratch. I see a chat there. Okay, there's a really cool article that Michelle just shared on powering agents and stuff behind the scenes. So yeah, we'll get that, absolutely. So there's some cool stuff you can do with Streamlit. And so we like to showcase Streamlit because a lot of this code is already written for you. You don't have to worry about rewriting a lot of the script if you're not sure how to write Python, for example. There's a lot of examples out there. And you can see the code here, for example, that it's pulling, and it's an API-based service. So our Cortex analyst here is an API-based, and we're using the API. And I can ask a question. I'm just going to break that down so I have the questions here. Can you show me a breakdown of customer support tickets by service type, cellular versus business internet? Now, that might not have given me the same answer in Copilot versus using this as a more defined answer with our semantic layer. But what happens is it's going to take that question plus your metadata of your database and your schemas, for example, going over to our inference cluster, and it's going to say, our interpretation of your question is, can you break this down? And it will give you a more accurate query back on a SQL query. And in my case here, it's built in that you might want to see the data set and or maybe a visualization, like a bar chart of this case of these responses as well. So this is giving me that ability to ask those natural language questions of the data itself. And if you want to dig deeper, if you want to ask second level questions, I just have them written here so I don't have to rewrite them every time. I'm actually horrible at talking and typing at the same time. I can ask that second level question. You can build it in so there's multi-turn conversation. So we'll take your chat history plus your new question and ask it and keep that context aware responses. So if I ask the question, how many unique customers have raised a support ticket with cellular versus type email, it can give me that answer back and says there's 58 people here. So I can go after them now with a response based on those responses, for example. Questions so far? So far, so good? Okay. So behind the scenes, now I won't go through this just in the essence of time, but there's a lot happening behind the scenes from, like I said, the semantic model that we create, that question itself, having to actually do all the classification, the extraction of the data, and then giving you that relative response back. Michelle just put some interesting blogs. There's another cool blog on just behind the scenes and how Cortex analysts actually worked to interpret your question and give you your answer back. And it's done as a service. Like I mentioned, you go through the UI, you point your search service to the set of data that you're interested in querying and indexing against, and then it runs that surface against it, has the most up-to-date information so that when you're asking those questions, it's pointing back to the most indexed and updated set of data that you want to ask questions against. Now, we already talked about the Copilot, like I jumped into that a little ahead of time. But the idea being, like I mentioned, like text to SQL is hard. Text to SQL on enterprise data, your specific data is even harder. And that's where the Cortex analyst comes in to actually make it a lot easier. When you compare the two, like I mentioned, like the Copilot, like in our UI, that will give you high precision, but it expects the human in the loop. But that's where analyst comes in with that semantic layer behind in a YAML file below below the scene or behind the scenes. That gives you extremely high accuracy, very high precision of what you're asking. The last piece of the demo is really just focused on the Cortex search capabilities. So think of this as your unstructured data, your documents, you're pulling out the text from those unstructured documents, and then asking those questions about it. And so now earlier, Alejandro, you asked that question about indexing the data and getting that most accurate response. So this is where it's that service comes in. It's a fully managed indexing and retrieval capability. So when you have that question, like what are the new ECB capital requirements and for year 2022, The service itself, behind the scenes, there's a semantic layer lookup. So you are vectorizing, like it's vectorizing your data. It's creating chunks of those data. And it's actually using a keyword lexical search lookup as well. And that's being indexed and updated. And then behind the scenes, it's going to rank and reorder and give you the most accurate results. And in an API, you can take the top 10 or what you want, but in a lot of cases, you're just going to take the highest result output. And that will give you the most accurate response based on the question you asked on your data. These notes are old. This Cortex search is actually higher than private preview. And so the embedding capabilities, so we have our Arctic embedded capabilities. There's two that you can pick from that will embed essentially vectorize your data sets into our Snowflake database to allow you to do that Cortex search on top of it. The actual scripts, so that UI that you walk through to build out the Cortex search capability, it's going to build this script for you and drop it into your worksheet and let you run it behind the scenes, where you're really just creating that search service. You pick the compute warehouse. What's the target lag? So this is that refresh capability. So how fresh do you want that data to be? And in this case here, like every minute. If you work with dynamic tables, it's the same logic behind it. And now you just create that API, that search service API that you're basing it on, and then you can get it very detailed so it's updated and it's indexed for you to be able to utilize in that. Now I mentioned right at the beginning, like last year, all the POCs, the kicking the tires, the MVPs, this whole end-to-end RAG with Snowflake was all done manually. This Cortex search box, like the embedding, the building, the vectorization, all of that, you had to just run scripts and do that manually. We've taken that out and we've made that the service itself. Similarly, earlier in the year, the extract function, we were using a Python UDF to like using like a parse text information, like Python script that would do the extraction of like PDF to text. But now we have a parse document function that does that just as a single line of code. Or similarly, like the chunking capabilities, like you had to manually chunk the data, or you can actually just chunk those set of text into chunks using a split text recursive character function. So it's all designed to make it a lot easier for you to run this so that you have that embedded, updated, indexed search capability. So when you're asking those questions, the contextualized questions, it will give you that result back based on your question of that data that you're looking at. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, same thing. It's designed as like Streamlit as a front end. Now this can be designed, I have a couple organizations, they have, for example, an agent team that they need to pick a region, the state, a process, a year, some drop downs, and then they can ask a question of it, whatever you decide. I can just quickly ask things like, what kind of services group we have? And it's going to look through all of these PDF documents in this case, which has already been indexed for me. Oh, I didn't start it here. And give me a response back and search through all the documents that I've pointed Snowflake Cortex search against. Really, at the end of the day, I don't have to sift through these PDFs, these documents, and these invoices. It's going to go off, and it's going to be able to give me an answer really quickly that he has a 2-line service plan and ask me that question. So really, that's it. Now, what I would say is I can go into, that's the end-to-end Cortex AI. The other pieces that we could talk to on another call is really around document AI. I know this wasn't specifically designed for this, but think of this as document extraction for like automatic OCR and computer vision and AI on top of documents. So you can do natural language extraction of hundreds of thousands of documents that you need to get answers from. They can just run through Snowflake and it will automatically pull out that key information for you. And you can kind of see an example of this. If I have this equipment inspection report, if I have thousands of those and I need to find, what's the machine that was inspected, what was the serial number of the machine, overall inspection grade, you can ask those questions very easily, and it's going to pull out a pipeline with those answers, with the accuracy of those answers, and drop that into Snowflake so they can utilize that downstream. So I'm going to stop there. That's quite a bit in the hour. Really, that is at the end of the session there. So, Michelle, if you want to, for any next steps or
yeah,
absolutely.